watching All 24 News World News Program, broadcasting to you live from the capital, Algiers. And up next are tonight's top stories. Algeria hosts African counterterrorism workshop, pushing for a united continental strategy as threats grow across borders. Deadly floods hit Morocco, lay bare fragile infrastructure, prompting outcry over the authorities' neglect. Also in our news, in Sudan, as the country's humanitarian crisis deepens, a new report reveals 140 mass graves in Al-Fashir, stoking genocide's fear. Coming up next as well, Berlin talks on Ukraine show progress. Washington pushes Kiev on Donbass, and EU flags frozen assets as a key hurdle. Welcome back. First up in our news tonight, a workshop on the draft Continental Strategic Action Plan to combat terrorism in Africa opened Monday in Algiers, the capital. Organized by the African Center for Counterterrorism, the meeting brings together a wide range of stakeholders to help shape a unified continental approach. The plan builds on existing national and regional efforts and aims to strengthen coordination and cooperation in line with the Malabo Declaration adopted at the African Union's 2022 Extraordinary Summit. The two-day workshop is expected to conclude with the adoption of the draft plan and a set of recommendations to guide its final approval by the African Union's policy bodies.
I'll now give the floor to نجتمع اليوم لافتتاح أشغال هذه الورشة.
We gathered today to inaugurate this workshop dedicated to studying the continental strategic action for combating terrorism with the participation of a select group of experts and specialists from various African regions and institutions. This broad participation clearly demonstrates the depth of continental commitment and the shared will to confront one of the most serious challenges affecting our continent's present and future.
Algeria's Secretary of State for African Affairs Salma Bakhta called for a more coherent and integrated continental approach, grounded in a clear vision that strengthens Africa's strategic sovereignty in the fight against terrorism. She underscored the importance of reinforcing African ownership of counterterrorism and violent extremism prevention strategies, while enhancing the continent's role as an influential and effective partner in international efforts to address the threat.
دعا قادة الدول والحكومات الإفريقية خلال القمة الاستثنائية للاتحاد الإفريقي.
During the extraordinary summit of the African Union held in Malabo in 2022, African heads of states and government called for review and strengthening of the continental response to combating terrorism. This initiative falls within the mandate entrusted to the President of the Republic, Mr. Abdelmajid Tebboune, in his capacity as the African Union champion for counter-terrorism and the prevention of violent extremism. The aim is to mobilize political will at the highest levels, consolidate African ownership of counter-terrorism strategies. Given the nature of these challenges and their interconnected dimensions, there is a clear need for Africa to strengthen its presence and role as an influential strategic actor in the international effort to combat terrorism. This requires a more coherent and integrated continental approach based on a clear vision and the consolidation of strategic sovereignty.
The Algerian Secretary of State for African Affairs has underscored the urgency of activating proposed continental counterterrorism mechanisms. She stated that strengthening the capabilities of Africa's own specialized institutions is a crucial element for an effective collective response.
لقاؤنا في لحظة دقيقة تمر بها إفريقيا.
Our meeting is taking place at a critical moment for Africa, as terrorism is no longer a circumstantial phenomenon or confined to specific geographical areas, but has turned into a transnational threat that is adaptive and feeds on complex interactions that combine transnational organized crime, illicit economies, illegal trade in resources, the increasing exploitation of modern technologies, and the exploitation and the exacerbation of structural fragility in some countries. As a result, Africa today seems to bear the greatest burden of this danger, as it accounts for more than 7% of the victims of terrorism and the global level in a structural crisis that affects the authority of states, undermines development paths, and fuels cycles of instability.
تمس سلطة الدول وتقوض مسارات التنمية وتغذي دوامات عدم الاستقرار.
Similarly, Mansouri warned that terrorism in Africa has evolved from a limited situational phenomenon into a transnational and adaptive threat. Driven by complex dynamics and placing the heaviest global burden on the continent.
ينعقد لقاؤنا في لحظة دقيقة تمر بها إفريقيا.
Our meeting is taking place at a critical moment for Africa, as terrorism is no longer a circumstantial phenomenon or confined to specific geographical areas, but has turned into a transnational threat that is adaptive and feeds on complex interactions that combine transnational organized crime, illicit economies, illegal trade in resources, the increasing exploitation of modern technologies, and the exploitation and the exacerbation of structural fragility in some countries. As a result, Africa today seems to bear the greatest burden of this danger, as it accounts for more than 7% of the victims of terrorism and the global level in a structural crisis that affects the authority of states, undermines development paths, and fuels cycles of instability.
In a related news story, Algeria's Secretary of State for African Affairs, Salma Mansouri, reaffirmed Algeria's long-standing commitment to actively contribute to collective efforts in support of peace, stability, and sustainable development across Africa. Speaking at the opening of the consultative workshop on the draft Continental Strategic Action Plan to combat terrorism, she described the Algiers meeting as a key step toward a coordinated African response that reflects today's threats and the continent's specific realities.
إن الوثيقة المعروضة على نقاشكم اليوم.
The document presented to your discussion today represents a key milestone in the process of developing a coordinated African response that addresses the nature of current threats and take into account the specificities of the continental context. Therefore, the success of this process will be measured by our ability to translate the adopted orientations into coordinated and implementable practical measures. Algeria, in fulfillment of its African and historical commitments, reiterates its readiness to continue actively contributing to this collective dynamic in service of the goals, peace, stability, and sustainable development on the continent. I express my hope that your discussions will lead to strong and practical recommendations that rise to the level of the challenges at hand.
وأعرب عن أملي في أن تفضي مناقشاتكم إلى توصيات قوية وعملية ترقى إلى مستوى التحديات المطروحة.
Also speaking at the workshop, the acting director of the African Union's Counterterrorism Center, Idriss Mounir, praised Algeria's pivotal role in the continent's fight against terrorism. He highlighted Algeria's hosting of the AU Counterterrorism Center and its active work in regional and international forums as proof of its commitment to African peace and security. Al-Ali stated that Algeria's efforts to help build legal and procedural frameworks make it a cornerstone of Africa's collective security vision.
The role of the African Union Center for Counter-Terrorism and the Prevention of Violent Extremism, alongside Algeria's current chairmanship of the UN Security Council Counter-Terrorism Committee, places it in a unique position, enabling it to serve as a strategic link between African priorities and the global governance framework for combating terrorism. Algeria's hosting of the African Union Center for Counter-Terrorism and the African Mechanism for Police Cooperation reflect the deep trust that the African Union places in Algeria's role as a key actor in achieving regional and continental stability, as well as its capacity to support and reinforce African governance for peace and security over the long term.
Moving on to a different matter, but still with Algeria's related news. Algerian President Abdelmadjid Tebboune received the ambassador of the Republic of Korea, Yuki Jun, for a farewell meeting on Monday. Following the meeting, Ambassador Yuki Jun stated that Algeria is South Korea's sole strategic partner and a true friend. He praised what he called a revitalization of the partnership, crediting President Tebboune's focus on developing bilateral ties. The outgoing ambassador noted that trade between the two nations reached roughly $4 billion in 2024. He also commended Algeria's active role in international forums and on the UN Security Council.
It has been an honor to represent Korea in a country that holds a special place in our hearts. It is not only our only strategic partner on the African continent, but also a friend with whom we share a common vision. This occasion provides a valuable opportunity to assess the path we have crossed together and to look forward to the future. During my 2.5-year mission in Algeria, I have witnessed a new dynamism and a genuine resurgence in our bilateral partnership. This is largely thanks to the President of the Republic, Abdelmadjid Tebboune, who has given special attention to strengthening joint efforts with the Republic of Korea. Today, cooperation between our two countries has transcended the economic sphere, reaching multiple areas including security, cultural exchange, and people-to-people ties. Our trade relations have witnessed remarkable and rapid expansion, exceeding $3.9 billion in 2024, which clearly reflects the vitality of our bilateral cooperation. The governments of both countries are working diligently to revitalize the activities of the Algerian-Korean Joint Committee, and Korean companies are expressing their readiness to contribute effectively and efficiently to the ambitious industrial development program. I would also like to commend Algeria's active role in international forums and the support it has provided to my country. Algeria and Korea have worked closely together with the United Nations Security Council. And in conclusion, I wish Algeria and its great people continued prosperity, progress, and success.
President Abdelmadjid Tebboune received Jordan's chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Major General Youssef Lahniti, on Monday. According to the Algerian presidency, the Jordanian military chief delivered a message from King Abdullah II to the president. The meeting was attended by Army General Said Shingriha, the minister delegate to the Minister of National Defense and Chief of Staff of the People's National Army, as well as Bouanam Bouanam, Principal Private Secretary to the President's Office. President Abdelmadjid Tebboune has granted a full pardon to Mohammed Al-Amin Belghit, who had been serving a final prison sentence. In a statement on Monday, the Algerian presidency said the decision was taken in accordance with the constitution, notably Articles 91 and 182, and following the advisory opinion of the Supreme Judicial Council. The presidential decree was signed granting a pardon for the remainder of the sentence. President of the Republic, Mr. Abdelmadjid Tebboune, received Professor Elias Zarhouni on Monday. According to the Algerian presidency, the meeting was attended by Professor Kamal Sanhaji, Director of the National Agency for Health Security. The Algerian parliament is set to vote on December 24 on a historic law criminalizing colonialism. The legislation seeks to define crimes committed by the French colonial rule in Algeria as state crimes and includes provisions holding the French government accountable for its colonial past. Karim Faz Zakri has the story.
From nearly 132 years under French colonial rule to the hard-won freedom of July 1962, Algeria's struggle for independence remains deeply rooted in national memory. Today, that history is taking legal form. Parliament is moving toward the adoption of a law that would formally criminalize French colonialism in Algeria. The bill is designed to serve as a legal reference framework covering the entire colonial period, from the arrival of French forces on June 14, 1830, to the restoration of national sovereignty on July 5, 1962. The proposed law also sets out mechanisms aimed at holding France accountable, including provisions that call for official recognition and a formal apology for crimes committed during colonial rule. The law consists of 5 chapters and 27 articles. Its objective is to criminalize French colonialism in Algeria from June 14, 1830 until independence on July 5, 1962. It defines the legal nature of colonial crimes as full-fledged state crimes and establishes the responsibility of the French government for its colonial past, including mechanisms for recognition and apology, as well as penal provisions against glorifying colonialism. Parliament is expected to hold a plenary debate next Sunday, ahead of a final vote scheduled for Wednesday, December 24th. For lawmakers, the bill goes beyond legislation. It is framed as a matter of national memory, an assertion of sovereign rights, and a step grounded in international law aimed at protecting Algeria's historical truth and national sovereignty.
Algeria has launched a 7 billion investment plan to boost its refining sector, aiming to become a regional hub for oil refining and derivatives trading by the end of the decade. The move supports the country's shift from self-sufficiency to a major exporter of refined products. Salman Isib has the details.
Algeria is rolling out an ambitious plan to position itself as a regional hub for oil refining and petroleum derivatives by the end of the decade, a move that signals a major shift in the country's energy strategy. The plan builds on Algeria's existing strength, including modern port infrastructure in Arzio and Skikda, and its strategic proximity to European markets, giving the country a logistical edge in the exports and trade. At the heart of this strategy is a sharp boost in refining capacity. Algeria aims to raise total crude oil refining output from 677,000 barrels per day to 800,000 barrels per day by 2027, an increase 1/3 in just 2 years. To make that happen, authorities have earmarked $7 billion in investments to modernize and expand refining infrastructure. A key project is a new refinery in Hassi Mas'oud in South Algeria, expected to add around 97,000 barrels per day, or roughly 5 million tons annually, to national capacity. The expansion also includes major upgrades at existing sites. In Arzio, a naphtha cracking unit will produce more than 1.2 million tons of gasoline, while in Skikda, a fuel cracking plant is set to generate over 1.75 million tons of diesel. Together, these projects will reinforce Algeria's 6 major refineries, stretching from the east and west of the country to the south and the capital, Algiers. With these investments, Algeria is not only aiming for energy self-sufficiency, but also looking to play a bigger role in regional fuel markets, turning refining into a new engine of economic growth.
To regional news now, at least 37 people have died in Morocco after flash floods hit the city of Safi. Moroccan State TV reported the rising death toll on Monday as rescue teams continue searching for those still missing. The floods swept through dozens of homes and vehicles, while many roads were cut off in the city, about 300 kilometers south of the capital, Rabat.
So far, we are speaking of 37 people, although there is still no official statement. More than 40 injured have been admitted to Mohammed V Hospital. The Safi region is going through a painful period, with the river level having reached the port area. At this stage, we are still waiting for confirmed figures on the total number of victims affected.
Victims of the Safi floods criticized the absence of officials and the lack of support following the deadly rains. They called on residents from nearby cities for assistance, saying local authorities remained absent despite the disaster's severe impact on dozens of families.
People are talking about organizing the African Cup or things like that, but we don't want any of that. All we want is to fix this situation. This is a disaster. It breaks my heart to see children suffering. We have no infrastructure, nothing at all.
Survivors of the flooding are demanding an urgent and impartial investigation. They want to uncover the reasons behind the disaster and hold accountable anyone responsible for infrastructure failures and neglect.
We are exhausted from suffering like this every year. On top of that, we are forced to pay from our own pockets. What is our fault? What is our sin? What wrongdoing have traders committed to injure this year after year? Those who must be held accountable are the officials and the authorities. Those who must be held accountable are the officials and the authorities, not us. The real question is, what have the authorities and the council done to prevent the Safi region from falling into this same crisis every year? All the programs exist only on paper. In reality, all we see are repeated disasters.
President Ibrahim Ghali affirmed that the Sahrawi people are fully aware of the challenges and conspiracies against them. Speaking on Sunday at a meeting with state officials and Polisario Front representatives, he said these schemes will fail, emphasizing that the unity and awareness of the Sahrawi people form a solid barrier. Ghali called on citizens to persevere, work together, and protect the gains achieved, highlighting the Moroccan occupation's failure to impose its agenda within the UN Security Council.
The Sahrawi people are fully aware of the challenges and plots against them, and their unity and resilience will remain an unbreakable barrier to all conspiracies as they prepare to make 50 years since the proclamation of the Sahrawi state. This phase calls for steadfastness, collective effort, and the consolidation of achieved gains.
Switching focus to the war in Sudan. The Sudanese Doctors Network reported that 9 people have died and 17 others were injured in a rapid support forces attack on a Dilling military hospital in South Kordofan. In a Monday statement, the network condemned the targeting of health facilities and staff, holding the rapid support forces responsible and urging the international community to act to protect civilians, medical facilities, and lift the siege. Yale University's Humanities Research Laboratory reported at least 140 suspected mass grave sites in Al-Fashir, West Sudan, potentially containing tens of thousands of bodies. In a Sunday statement, the center accused the Rapid Support Forces of systematically removing evidence before independent investigations could take place. Researchers said they observed a brigade-sized force clearing human remains in an area devoid of civilians. Sudanese humanitarian group Mashad warned on Monday of the risk of a repeat genocide in Kordofan, calling it a clear violation of international law. In a statement to All 24 News TV, Mashad's president Ahmed Abdullah Ismail condemned this systematic attack or attacks by the Rapid Support Forces on civilians and infrastructure in Kadugli, Al Ubaid, and White Nile State. He urged the international community to act swiftly to protect civilians and hold perpetrators accountable.
These forces are currently committing acts of terrorism and grave violations that are completely inhumane and constitute a flagrant breach of all international and regional conventions and norms. What is happening today not only threatens Sudan, but also undermines the entire system of international values and standards. The continuation of these operations in light of the international community's silence will only perpetuate an unprecedented humanitarian catastrophe. Therefore, we condemn these practices in the strongest terms and appeal to the world's conscience to break its silence and assume its moral and legal responsibilities by standing in solidarity with the Sudanese people to preserve what remains of Sudan and put an end to this grave humanitarian disaster that threatens the very existence and future of this nation.
The International Organization for Migration reported that 1,730 Sudanese were displaced in these days or 3 days from South Kordofan state. In a Sunday statement, the IOM said 905 people fled Kadugli, Dilling, and Al-Kuwait, while 825 left Ghadir between December 11 and 13. The displacement is linked to escalating fighting between the Sudanese army and the Rapid Support Forces amid worsening insecurity in the region. And in the Palestine file tonight, the Zionist occupation forces continued their violations of the ceasefire agreement in Gaza for a 66th consecutive day on Monday. Airstrikes and intensive artillery shelling targeted areas including the Bureij refugee camp, Khan Yunis, Jabalia, and Gaza City. Demolition operations were also carried out on buildings in the eastern part of the Strip. Al-Aqsa TV reported that civil defense teams recovered 20 bodies from the rubble of a house in Gaza City's Al-Rimal neighborhood. Sources said more than 80 people remained trapped under the debris after the house was destroyed by the Rapid Support Forces. Rescue efforts are hampered by limited resources and heavy equipment, worsened by ongoing siege of the Gaza Strip.
We recovered a group of martyrs who were present at the site, and on the second and third days 49 martyrs were found and buried in this location. Inside this site, out of a total of 93 martyrs, 47 remain under the rubble.
I was among those there and lost many family members. The children who survived grew up surrounded by fear and violence. Today marks 2 years since the tragedy. We thank God and express our gratitude to the school for caring for the children, hoping one day to reunite with our loved ones.
Even as the genocidal war in Gaza winds down, the humanitarian crisis continues. Heavy rains are hitting a city already in ruins, toppling buildings and exposing displaced families to harsh conditions. Karim Mustafa reports.
A fragile ceasefire may be in place, but life in Gaza remains a struggle. Now, heavy rains and collapsing buildings are adding to the humanitarian crisis. In fact, Gaza's residents are facing yet another threat. Over the weekend, 2 buildings collapsed, killing at least 12 people, according to local authorities. Officials warn that many war-damaged buildings remain unstable, and torrential rains are making conditions even more dangerous.
All alternatives available to citizens are dangerous. A citizen's alternative to leaving this building at risk of collapse is a tent. A tent, without a doubt, cannot be safe for citizens. It cannot protect them from the cold, the winter, floods, stray dogs, rodents, or disease. Therefore, all the alternatives currently available to citizens in Gaza are dangerous and difficult.
Among those affected are Mohammed and Mahmoud, whose home gave way after enduring 2 years of bombardment and relentless rain.
I thought the house was fine, not bad, and I stayed in it. Until last Friday, I reached the end of El Jalal and came back, and the house had collapsed on the boy and girl. Their mother was inside, their other sister was inside as well, and their younger sister was also inside. I arrived and found the house collapsed.
My house was damaged. I had to live in this house. My second house is also damaged, and I'm exposed to anything at any moment because this house could collapse. I couldn't live in tents because they are worn out. 2 years of suffering in tents. Before we prayed for rain, but now we fear it will rain, lest it take more lives.
The stormy weather in Gaza Strip is not only complicating the lives of Palestinian families, but is also slowing rescue operations and delaying the recovery of bodies still trapped under the rubble. As Gaza grapples with post-war destruction and now nature's fury, authorities warn that urgent aid and shelter are needed to prevent further loss of life.
A young Palestinian man was killed on Monday by Zionist occupation forces south of Beit Lahm in the West Bank. The Palestinian Red Crescent set troops stormed the town of Tuqua under heavy fire, resulting in the fatality. Zionist occupation forces launched a wide-scale raid and arrest campaign Monday across the West Bank and Jaffa. The Palestinian Information Center reported 22 arrests in Ramallah, Nablus, Jenin, Al-Quds, and Ariha, including 3 recently released prisoners, and 14 arrests in Jaffa, including a member of the Fatwa Council. And as you followed in our headlines tonight, high-stakes negotiations over Ukraine's future have exposed deep divisions within the EU, with President Volodymyr Zelensky describing marathon talks in Berlin as productive, despite growing pressure from Washington and continued Russian military advances. Yasin reports now.
Over the weekend, Zelensky met with the US Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner as European leaders, including the UK's Keir Starmer, France's Emmanuel Macron and Germany's Friedrich Merz, joined the discussions in Berlin. The talks have centered on strong, legally binding security guarantees from the US and Europe, which could provide Ukraine protection similar to NATO's collective defense clause.
And today here in Berlin, we held our consultations with the American side. This was also a very important discussion, as Berlin has become a kind of hub for major diplomatic decisions today. Our conversations are never easy, I will say honestly, but this one was productive, with many details discussed, and it is important that a significant amount of time is devoted to such talks.
Representatives held in-depth discussions regarding the 20-point peace plan, economic agendas and more. Much progress was made, and they will meet again on Monday.
The discussions remain contentious, particularly over territory. US officials have proposed that Ukraine withdraw from the Donbas region, including Donetsk and Luhansk, as part of a peace deal. Kyiv has firmly rejected that demand, warning it could encourage Russia to push further.
We have to understand that Donbas is not Putin's endgame. If it gets Donbas, then the fortress is down, and then they definitely move on with taking the whole of Ukraine. And if Ukraine goes, then other regions are also in danger. We know this from the history, and we should learn from history.
Meanwhile, Moscow continues to insist that Ukraine is not to join NATO, and Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov has reiterated Russia's stance in Berlin.
Naturally, Ukraine's membership in NATO is one of the cornerstones, and of course it is subjected to special discussion. And this is the sense of negotiation process that I repeat once again. We do not want to conduct in megaphone style. Negotiations are underway between US, EU and Ukraine's negotiators. Once they finish their work, we expect the US to update us on the version of settlement currently being discussed.
On the battlefield, fighting continues. Both sides have reported drone attacks and Russian advances in some areas, highlighting the continued intensity of the war, even as diplomats search for a settlement. At the same time, the European Union faces internal challenges. Brussels is trying to finalize a €210 billion aid package for Ukraine, including frozen Russian assets, but disagreements persist among member states. France and Germany show increasing public fatigue, while North America remains supportive of continued assistance. The coming days are critical for Ukraine as Berlin seeks to secure strong security guarantees and Brussels works to ensure funding and a united response. Ukrainian leaders must navigate a delicate balance, defending their territory, winning international support, and keeping the fragile hope for peace alive.
In a related news story, the European Union acknowledges internal divisions over using frozen Russian assets to finance Ukraine. On Monday, EU High Representative for Foreign Affairs Kai Kallas stated that discussions on providing a loan to Ukraine secured by these assets are facing difficulties and that no EU decision has been reached. She indicated that the optimal option, in her view, is a compensation loan. It is time to catch up on more international news stories in the News in Brief with Sofian Kanturi.
The Thai army announced it has halted fuel shipments crossing the border with Laos over concerns they could be diverted to Cambodia. The Defense Ministry spokesperson said restrictions were imposed at the Chongmeng border crossing after intelligence indicated the supplies might reach Cambodian forces, adding that Thailand is also considering limiting ship movements over security fears. Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro proposed forming a joint strategic alliance among Latin American countries to confront what he called aggressive measures and pressure facing the region. Caracas' allies has also condemned U.S. threats against oil tankers in the Caribbean, describing seizure of Venezuelan vessel as deliberate threat. Chile's Supreme Electoral Council announced the victory of far-right candidate José Antonio Cast in the second round of presidential election held on Sunday. Cast won presidency with 58% of the vote, defeating left-wing rival Ginat Jara, who secured 42%. France has called for delaying the approval of the upcoming trade agreement between the European Union and South America, urging more time before the vote. Prime Minister Sébastien Lecornu said the European Commission's proposed safeguards have not yet been approved by the European Parliament and that additional guarantees are needed to ensure fair competition for European producers.
And that's the end of our news program for tonight. Thank you for watching. Do take care.